thought that you knew it all.
Now, vampirism, true vampirism, is basically the ability to feed off of another. The ability to take in energy from someone in order to replenish your own energy. And there's many reasons that people do this. They do this sometimes for a need, and sometimes they do it just as a desire, to take energy in from someone else. There's also vampirism where people feed sexually off of one another. The sexual energy is taken into the vampire and used for themselves. And there are those who drink blood, and those are called sanguine vampires. Now, the blood-drinking vampires, for the most part, it's a very, very personal experience for the vampire. It's not something that we don't just go around biting people and feeding off of people. There are a lot of health and safety issues involved. And for me personally, I've only fed off of 4 people in my entire life. And they were people who I cared very, very deeply about. So I am a sign vampire and a tantric vampire and a sanguine vampire. I feed all 3 ways. I could feed chronically or psychically, by touching or just putting my hand in the proximity of another person. This is called light feeding technique. It's similar to Reiki. Is anyone familiar with Reiki? Is anyone a Reiki healing technique? Reiki is when you radiate energy out into a person in order to heal them physically. Chronic vampirism is when you take energy in to yourself. So even if I'm not touching him, he could feel this energy coming from my hand. Can you feel? So when I touch him, I'm pulling that energy into myself, and that's chronic vampirism. There's light feeding, such as touching. There's deep feeding where I'll actually place my mouth on him, not biting, but just place my mouth on him and draw that energy into me through my mouth. Or, touching him and caressing him and just getting deeper and deeper into his energy. The tantric vampire feeds sexually, and that could be any sexual energy. That could come from masturbation, intercourse. It could even come from watching other people have sexual encounters and taking that energy into yourself. And the sanguine feeding is blood feeding. Now, I do have very long fangs. I don't know if you could see. Can you see? I don't ever bite with my fangs. It's unsanitary, it's unhealthy, and it could be very dangerous, especially with my fangs because they're so deep. Sparky, do you have your fangs in tonight? So you can see Sparky's fangs are a little bit shorter. That's usually about the length for the vampire fangs. And these are all custom-made fangs that we had made. You can have custom-made fangs done here in the city and across the United States. There are fangsmiths who specify hidden fang making techniques, and basically they take a mold of your mouth and then they form the fangs over them. And it's a fairly expensive thing, but for us in the vampire community, it's worth the investment. If you look in the movies and in books and television, the vampire is very dark and seductive. The vampire has the ability to mesmerize, entrance, to have her victims fall prey to her. They want to be her prey. They want to give themselves to her. And in the BDSM scene, in a role play scene, there are many ways that you can play with that with your submissive. There's the stalking scene, stalking encounter, basically where the vampire is enticing and seducing her prey to come to her, stalking him, seducing him, bringing him to her will, or her to his will, as it may be. I'm sorry, I don't want to discriminate against the male vampires. It could work either way, obviously. Um, the submissive can also be a student of the vampire, someone who wants to learn the ways of the vampire, someone who wants to serve the dominant, basically like Renfield was to Dracula, his servant, in order to please his or her master, mistress, and with the hopes of being turned and becoming immortal. There's a supernatural play in which a submissive can become the sacrifice. And this is great for setting up a scene for a dark supernatural play. The sacrificial altar is wonderful. To set up a table in the room with some candles, some dark music, some incense, and while you're submissive there and bind him and tell him or her that you're going to sacrifice them to your gods, believe me, it's going to instill fear in the submissive. And it's great. It's like doing a scene from a movie, and it doesn't even matter what god you're going to sacrifice. You could say anything at that point to have them at your will and to have that dark supernatural element and to, dress in, dark romantic gear. Knives are great for playing with this because as I did with him, I kind of toyed with him a little, scratched him a little, used my blade to play with him. It instills fear in the submissive, and what I want to bring him to is that point where he says, "Yes, mistress, I will give myself to you. I'll do whatever you say. I'll sacrifice for you." I'm a fairly popular vampire on MySpace, and I get a lot of messages from people who tell me, turn me, transform me, bite me, to the extreme part of, yes, I will sacrifice myself for you. And most of these people really don't mean that. What they're doing is they're getting into that fantasy element of what it would be like to give themselves to a vampire or to a dark witch or sorceress, or someone would have that complete power over them.